I want to give a huge shout out to today's sponsor, MailTag. MailTag is a Chrome extension that allows you to track your emails in real time for free. It also lets you track other cool things like link clicks, email reopens, and even the device that was used to open your emails. Be sure to check out MailTag by clicking the link in the description below. Alright guys, so I haven't done one of these videos in quite a long time, meaning the opinionated comparison type of videos. But this is a question that I'm asked almost daily. Should I start with React or Angular? And sometimes Vue.js, and I do want to say that I do love Vue, I think it's great, but I wanted to stick to these two technologies for this video. Now I've used both and I really like both. It's not a video where I'm going to bash one or the other or say that you should always use one over the other. Every developer and every project is completely different and they have a different set of needs. So saying that you should always use React or always use Angular is pretty damn stupid. But this video is to help each individual developer decide for themselves what they want to specialize in, what route they want to take, especially the new guys. I think you should learn both, but of course you have to start somewhere. And the last thing that I want to mention here is that Angular is a framework and React is technically a library by itself. Okay, there's no surprise there. Please don't, blow up the comments saying, this is a framework, React's a library. We all know that. But there's things you can add, packages you can add to React that will basically turn it into a framework that directly competes with Angular, and it does directly compete with Angular. All right. So what we're doing is we're basically comparing the two ecosystems, not the exact framework versus the exact library. All right. So let's go ahead and move on. Now we're going to have a couple different categories. The first thing I want to talk about is the learning curve of both technologies. When you choose a technology to learn, this is one of the first things that you think about. How long is it going to take me to learn this? Will I even be able to learn it? Will it be too hard? Well, let's start with Angular. And by the way, when I say Angular, I'm talking about Angular 4, not Angular.js. All right, I just want to make that clear. So Angular is a big framework, which means that it's powerful and it includes a lot, but of course there's a lot to learn. So when starting to learn Angular, you're going to hear a lot of new intimidating vocabulary like dependency injection, directives, decorators, pipes, etc. I will tell you that it sounds a lot scarier than it really is. Once you grasp these concepts, they're actually not hard at all, and you'll see how helpful and powerful they actually are. All right, another thing you have to deal with Angular is TypeScript. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, so it's basically JavaScript plus a bunch of other features, including static typing. So when we create our components in Angular, we can add types to them. So if it's a string or a number or a Boolean. Now, this is important to mention that this is optional. You do not have to do this in Angular or in TypeScript. You don't have to define any types, but I would definitely recommend it because it does make your code much more robust, less prone to errors, and in my opinion makes it much cleaner. So you can also create things like interfaces and you can kind of map out your data. And I know that this stuff sounds difficult, but once you get the hang of it, it really just adds, it adds a robustness to your application. All right, Angular is more opinionated than React, which is one of the advantages, in my opinion, because with React you can do the same thing a million different ways. With Angular, there's only one or two ways to do certain things, which makes it easier to follow. It gives you much more clear instructions on what you're supposed to do. All right, so I look at that as a big advantage to Angular. All right, but again, it's all preference. You might like the flexibility to do things different ways. All right, so let's move to React. So as I said before, React is a library, and if we were talking about just the core library, it's much smaller and much easier to learn than the Angular framework. Now that's great, and you'll be able to say you learned React in a shorter amount of time than you did Angular, but React by itself is not as powerful or it's not even near as powerful for large applications. It's a great Vue library, but if you want routing, validation, HTTP requests, things like that, you're going to have to install other packages, and of course that adds to the learning curve as well. Now, as I said, with React, there's a lot of different ways to do the same thing. If you look at React code from two different developers, they'll probably look completely different. You know, whether where they're making HTTP requests, how they handle state and properties, all that stuff can be handled very differently, and a lot of the times it can be in the wrong way, yet it will still work. Or some parts will work until, you know, you get to a certain point and you realize you did it all wrong and you have to go back and redo it. So that to me is the worst part of React, but that's just from my own experience. You guys might think differently about it. Okay, once you find the best practices, that stuff kind of all goes away, and you know, it's fine, but that does add to the learning curve, and that's what we're talking about here. All right, so React doesn't use templates or traditional templates. It uses something called JSX, or JavaScript extension, or JavaScript syntax extension, which basically allows us to embed HTML in the JavaScript. And at first, this can seem a little quirky, especially when you were, you know, you're probably taught to separate your markup and your JavaScript or your logic. But this is something that is really powerful once you get the hang of it, and it's really easy to get the hang of. It's basically just putting HTML inside JavaScript with a couple different changes, like you can't use the class attribute, you have to use class name, things like that. But it's actually really easy to learn. All right, so the last thing we have here is Redux. Okay, so React is often used with Redux or Flux, which are application level state managers. And in my opinion, Redux is frigging hard. Just setting it up and just learning the concepts of it is hard. Not just Redux, any kind of state manager. So I'm creating a React course now, and trying to explain Redux is definitely the toughest part. All right, I think it's overused. I think that a lot of developers use Redux where it's not needed. You know, you don't really need it for smaller applications, but many developers do insist on using it in React with almost all situations. And I don't know, personally, I don't think that that's needed. But, you know, it's all preference. People are going to do what they're going to do. But Redux is very powerful. I don't want to take that away from it, but when talking about the learning curve, it is pretty damn difficult to grasp at first. All right, so the next category is performance, and this is kind of tough because it's not really fair to directly compare the performance of Angular to React. And the reason for that is because Angular is a complete front-to-back framework. It includes routing, form tools, HTTP library, reactive extensions. All of these features, they bloat the framework and they make it slower. React, however, by itself is just a Vue library, which of course is much smaller and of course much faster. Now, once you start adding packages like the router, you know, adding an HTTP client and any testing, whatever you're going to add to your React application, then it starts to come up a little more to where Angular is, and then you can start comparing them fairly. But even after that, React still wins the performance department. It is a very fast technology in general. One thing to mention, though, is that the change from Angular 2 to Angular 4, there's not much on the surface, but under the hood they did quite a bit to increase the performance. So Angular 4 is definitely, you know, performs better than Angular 2 did. So I just wanted to mention that, but I think that React definitely wins in the performance department. All right, so now let's take a look at features. Now I do want to mention that both frameworks have a lot of the same general features and advantages. They organize your code, they're component based, they offer dynamic markup, they're used to do a lot of the same things, and they share a lot of the same features. But let's look at some of the individual features. All right, now again, at its core, Angular obviously has a lot more features than React at its core. But we're kind of taking a look at the ecosystem and, you know, common packages that are used with React and stuff like that. So Angular is basically a batteries included framework. It comes with a component router, you know, reactive extensions for things like observables, an HTTP client, a forms module for validation, and the list goes on. All right. It also offers two-way data binding in a way that no other framework really does. Binding data from the view to the model is extremely easy using the ng model directive. Angular also supports MVC, model view controller, or at least different aspects from that design pattern. It also comes with features that are allow you to easily implement testing, both unit testing and end-to-end testing, which is also a great feature of Angular. So it's basically packed with features to build enterprise-level front-end applications. Now, React, on the other hand, does not include much at its core, but that's not to say that things can't be added to give it the features that Angular includes out of the box. Okay, plus some additional ones. React uses a virtual DOM, which is very powerful. It creates its own lightweight version of the actual DOM and only includes and updates what's needed rather than refreshing the entire thing. And this is part of the reason that React is really, really fast. It also uses JSX, which is more powerful than standard templates because you can put absolutely any type of JavaScript that you want in it. JSX is not required to use React, but it makes things a hell of a lot easier, and I can't think of any reason why you would not use JSX with Angular. All right, React also does a really good job of managing component state and properties. It makes data really easy to work with and pass around between components. In my opinion, passing data between components in Angular is much more difficult than doing it in React. All right, now React alone, it's kind of hard to maintain app level state. Component state is easy, but if you want true app level state management, then you're going to need something like Redux or Flux or MobX, which I said before is pretty damn confusing to learn, but that doesn't mean that it's not extremely powerful. So Redux, although it's hard, it is a great feature of the entire React ecosystem. All right, then you have external packages that are often used, like the React router. The new React router version 4 is a bit difficult to grasp, but it's also very powerful once you get it running and set it up correctly. There's a lot of different ways to use it as well. React doesn't have a core HTTP component like Angular does, but of course you can use Fetch, or you can use something like Axios, which is an external HTTP client. And then Enzyme is popular for testing React. So you have these different packages that are commonly used with React, even though they're not part of the actual library. All right, so I would say both technologies share a good amount of features, and they have some nice individual ones as well. So if you're just comparing the core technologies, then Angular, of course, is the clear winner. It includes a lot more, but you can add stuff to React to make it really powerful. All right, so what about tooling? So both Angular and React have some pretty nice command line interfaces. The Angular CLI and Create React app are both pretty great, and they really allow us to streamline development. The Angular CLI, in my opinion, is a bit more powerful because we can quickly generate things like components and services. As far as I know, Create React app can't do that. You basically have to create everything yourself as far as the files and the basic structure. Both systems use Webpack. They both have their own auto-loading dev servers. They have compiling and build tools. Obviously, Angular has the additional task of transpiling TypeScript, and the CLI has a script for that. When we run ng-serve, all that happens behind the scenes. Okay, it uses something called TSC, or TypeScript compiler, for that. And both have testing tools as well. I believe Create React app uses Jest for testing. And then one of, if not the most important part of these tools, is the ability to build out your application into production, into static assets that you can simply upload to a server, or you can place into your, the backend client folder if it's a full stack application. So these are really important. You don't need to use them, of course. You can build a React application just from the ground up with Webpack, but these make it a lot easier to not just build the application, but also compile and build it out for production. All right, so I think that they're both pretty even in that department. All right, so as I said, both of these technologies have their own ecosystems, which now spread well beyond the browser. So we'll start with Angular. So Ionic is a popular hybrid framework, which is basically an Angular application that runs inside of a native wrapper for mobile apps. So you can create mobile apps using Angular. Now, hybrid apps can be a bit clunky compared to native applications. The user experience can be not so great at times, not as fast and not as responsive. But I think out of the different hybrid frameworks, Ionic 3 is definitely the best one. All right, now we also have NativeScript, which allows us to build true native apps, iOS and Android apps, with Angular as well as JavaScript. Now, I'm in the process of learning about NativeScript now, so I can't say too much about it. Same thing with a lot of these technologies, but NativeScript does not seem to be, as good as React Native, at least at this point. But again, it's also newer. It's a newer technology. Now, Angular also has a material design component library. If you're a fan of material design, I hope to do a tutorial on that soon. Angular Universal is a seed project that can be used to render Angular on the server side. There's also NGRX Store, which is a state management library which was inspired by React's Redux. It's basically, it's based on state mutated by pure reducers. It also has integration with reactive extensions. All right, and you can see that these two once one of them does something, the other basically copies it in a kind of a different way. They've basically become like the Windows and Apple of JavaScript frameworks. All right, so React has quite the ecosystem. Of course, it has React Native, which is extremely popular. I would say it's the best way to build mobile apps with, web type technologies. It's very fast, and a lot of the applications, if built right, they're right up there with, native apps that are built on Swift or Java. Of course, if they're created correctly. You can write horrible applications with fantastic technologies. It's all up to the developer. React also has a material design library called Material UI, which, much like Angular's material design component, but this one seems to be a little bit more mature. Next.js is a framework for rendering server-side React applications. It aims to do this in the simplest way possible, so this can kind of be compared to Angular Universal. We also have MobX, which is another way to manage state. It works a bit different than Redux does. It provides a set of decorators to define observables and observers, and it introduces reactive logic into your state. All right, then we have Storybook, which is a component development environment for React. It allows you to browse a component library, view different states of each component, and interactively develop and test components. We even have React VR. React is getting into virtual reality, and I haven't used this yet, but I have watched a few videos on it. And then React Desktop is a JavaScript library built on top of React's library, which supposedly brings a native desktop experience to the web, featuring many Mac OS X and Windows 10 components. So as you can see, the React ecosystem is extremely large and powerful. React is making its way into basically every aspect of technology. So I'd say in this category, React definitely wins. So the last category we're going to look at is jobs. Now I have to stress that this really depends on where you are. Different companies in certain areas are using different technologies. So I would suggest checking out companies near you to see what they're using. But one common trend that I've noticed is that Angular 4, Angular 2, they're used quite a bit in the enterprise world. And I think that's because, Angular is geared more toward really large, scalable enterprise applications. The mean stack is incredibly popular, which is something that we didn't even talk about. And then React seems to be like the cool framework. It's used in the startup world. So basically the suits, the people in suits and ties are using Angular, and the hipsters with the scruffy beards are using React. At least that's what I've noticed. And then you also have Vue.js in there, which is up and coming, but definitely not as many jobs looking for Vue developers as React and Angular. At least, from what I've researched. Now, there's also quite a few companies that are still using AngularJS. I thought I'd mention that as well. But I don't have a solid answer on what's better to learn to get a job faster, especially, with the location issue. You guys in the comments, feel free to post your experiences and your opinions, maybe what they're looking for in your area. I've always been an entrepreneur and I've always had my own businesses, so I'm not the best person to give advice about getting a job, for a company, because I've always done my own thing. So I can only really tell you what I've researched, all right? And I'm not going to sit here and lie and tell you I know everything. All right, so bottom line with all of this is that there's really not a clear-cut answer for everyone. If you're deciding between these frameworks, look at the different categories and see what interests you, and try them both out. See which one you pick up quicker. Do some more research, of course, more than just this video. You're never going to get all the info you need from one person or one video, so read up on some blog posts, some business, business journal type websites, technology websites, and make a decision. And like I said, I think that you should learn both, but you need to start somewhere. All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and thanks for watching. Feel free to share your own opinions in the comments. Just please be respectful of everyone. No fanboy shit. And thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for watching. So I just want to give another shout out to MailTag, who sponsored this video. MailTag is a free Chrome browser extension that allows you to track your emails in real time. I've been using it myself for about a week now, and I can't recommend it enough. On top of email tracking, MailTag has a bunch of other features like desktop push notifications that alert you when your emails have been opened, link click tracking that shows if people have actually clicked on the links in your email, and a ton of other cool features. Again, all these features are completely free. Be sure to check out MailTag and click that link in the description.